Now, this video is very interesting to me, Adam, because we have Brianna Greyjoy. She's reading an article from a left-wing author called Zadie Smith. And the author is talking about these college protests, the pro-Gaza, pro-Palestinian college protests. And she's talking about, maybe from a left-wing leftist perspective, they should be a little bit more sensitive, right, to the Jewish students, to the Israeli students, because we've lived through so many years of left-wing college students saying, let's all be sensitive, right? Sensitive to minorities.
Yeah.
And she kind of plays the whole thing out according to the left-wing philosophy, the left-wing ideology. And it's so fascinating to me. Brianna Greyjoy completely doesn't get it. It's like it's so ingrained in her, it's invisible to her.
So people should be sensitive about the groups that she that she supports, right? But the groups that she doesn't support, they shouldn't be sensitive about. Is that where we're going with this?
It's basically she's like, hey, this philosophy has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Now let me explain what we're talking about, and then it plays directly into that philosophy.
Are words weapons of mass destruction? Well, acclaimed liberal author of White Teeth, Zadie Smith, argued as much in a recent piece for The New Yorker. That was roundly skewered by pro-Palestine voices over the weekend. Why? Well, although the piece was broadly sympathetic to the plight of Palestinians, it arguably engaged in a kind of both-siderism that chastised anti-war college protesters for insufficiently respecting the safety concerns of Jewish students on campus, even as bombs are killing Palestinian students' relatives in real time. In Smith's words, when I open newspapers and see students dismissing the idea that
you like the super poisoning the well right off the bat. It's like we're talking about how kids on college campuses feel while people are dying.
Yeah, I mean, the two don't really seem like connected issues. Unless you're saying because there's someone dying somewhere in the world, I can do horrible things at my college. Like, how does that really make sense?
That's essentially the logic of the argument. Like, protesters can do whatever they want because they're protesting for what I think is a worthy cause to protect lives.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think so. That's like a complete non sequitur.
Mm-hmm.
Some of their fellow students feel at this particular moment unsafe on campus, or arguing that such a feeling is simply not worth attending to, given the magnitude of what's occurring in Gaza. I find such sentiments cynical and unworthy of this movement. Smith specifically calls to mind a hypothetical Jewish student who finds herself referred to as a Zionist, and Smith wonders whether, in the context of a campus, if that student might be the weakest, most vulnerable person in the social dynamic, and whether that makes them deserving of having their safety prioritized. First, I'd like to point out that in this hypothetical...
So she sets out like the clear hierarchy, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's pretty interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's saying according to the philosophy that have been preached to us, right? That the far left has been preaching to us for the last 8 years. The Jewish kids on college campuses who are getting, attacked or harassed this way, they should be like the most victim status at the moment, right?
Is that what the article argues? Is that where
it's
she's going?
Sort of, yeah. They're kind of trying to say from the leftist philosophical perspective that, the protesters aren't living up to their own, philosophies of caring about the little person.
Right, of course. Yes.
Right.
Interesting.
The Zionist student objectively isn't the most vulnerable party. Physical violence has not been inflicted against pro-Israeli college kids yet. 3 Palestinian American students have been shot, 1 paralyzed, and a mob of 100 pro-Zionist counter-protesters physically attacked peaceful pro-Palestine students last week at UCLA with tear gas, bear mace, wooden planks, fireworks, and hammers. One female reporter for the school paper says she was repeatedly punched by a male pro-Israel counter-protester. 25 pro-Palestine protesters were hospitalized overnight. No arrests have been made. But ignoring the material reality of these protests and what's happening in the Middle East is why so many of these pundits are getting it so wrong. Zadie errs in making the same mistake so many conservatives make as they try to characterize or mischaracterize why leftists care about anything or anyone other than themselves. They seem unable to understand that tens of thousands of people have been killed, and most of us find it heartbreaking and want it to stop rather than keep funding it. It's as simple as that.
So it's obviously not as simple as that. And it's very interesting that she can't see this because you come to the problem where it's like, okay, there are people that are dying all over the world from horrible things that are going on all over the world. And you have to say, well, why is it that right now, like the campus culture has been so honed in on this one specific thing? Why is America, why is the media honed in on this one specific thing? And these are important questions to ask. Now, Brianna or other people say, well, it's because America's, helping fund it. It's like, sure, but, America is helping fund Saudi Arabia, right? And how many people are, they killing through, in Yemen and their other conflicts, way more than Israel's killed in this conflict. How come even though in China they're perpetuating a Uyghur genocide, okay, they're literally putting people in essentially work camps, okay, open air prisons, as some people would want to say, subjecting them to possibly organ harvesting and all sorts of other horrors. And all these colleges, they all have financial ties with China, and yet for some reason, there's no call for divestment for years. So it is an important question to ask, why is this specific issue? Why is the Israel-Palestine issue, for some reason, able to grab its little hooks into people's brains and get them all excited? Well, these other issues don't really seem to do anything.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Obviously, I would say that it perpetuates a convenient narrative that people want to forward. So that's why they buy into this. This is why they focus so much attention on it, because it's this narrative that, it's a colonial power
Yeah.
taking land away from indigenous people. Basically, it's like it's like 1619 project, but now. So they want to conceptualize it that way. These other things, well, look, I don't know much about the Uyghur genocide, so maybe there's that component there, but it's just, this is why they are focused on it.
Yeah. I mean, we watched, the other day, the Raina Halek on Pierce Morgan, and she was just perfectly verbalizing all this. She was saying that, Israel should be seen through the lenses, as you said, like European white settler colonialism. And that to me is part of why I think the big reason why they do focus on all this stuff, because they can very clearly in their mind, they're wrong, by the way, they're completely wrong and completely bigoted for them to think this, but they can view it through the lens of like, these are evil white European colonizers settling, innocent native brown people, where you don't have that with the Saudi Arabia Yemen situation. You don't have that in China because there's not like, quote, the white person bad guy for them to sort of latch onto as the evil person.
Yeah, seems racist.
But the truth is too inconvenient for conservatives like, say, Christopher Rufo, who support Israel but have to make sense of the asymmetry of death and destruction in the region that is disproportionately borne by Palestinians. To do that, Rufo has popularized framing the left's interest in equality, be it racial equality, gender equality, or equality for Arabs living in historic Palestine, as reflective of an ethos which sees everyone as either oppressed or oppressor. Rufo argues that these categories are mapped unfairly onto racial categories of people like black and white or Israeli and Palestinian, and that they serve as a kind of totalizing identity politics that lacks nuance and causes people to prejudge those in the oppressor group in a sort of reverse racism.
Well, look at that. Christopher Rufo, completely 100% correct.
You look at, she's articulating it here too. I'm pretty amazed by this. So,
Completely
but she's going
correct,
to fight
yes.
against it. She's going to say,
Right.
"Oh, that's not the case. That's not what's happening here."
Well,
So I'm interested what her argument is, that is not what's happening here.
do you think she's going to give a good, deep, understanding, philosophical argument for why that's not the case in this situation?
Well, let me be honest with you here. I'm more interested because I think it's going to be funny, and we could probably make some jokes about it. Just to be honest with you.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'm glad you're honest.
A lot of it always breaks down to, well, we are on the right side of history, and when we do it, it's okay. They seem to understand that there's like a double standard going here, but they're like, but we're the victims. So look, if we do detestable things, you can sign off on it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But even in Zadie Smith's hypothetical, the criticism is not of the Jewish student's religion, but of her politics. Her commitment to Zionism as a political project is what's under scrutiny here, even in Zadie's own hypothetical. As much as Congress wants to make it so, anti-Zionism is not, in fact, anti-Semitism. And the politics of Zionism are ripe for critique. Palestinians are not abstract oppressed parties or victims in this scenario. They are quite literally being victimized by dumb bombs, drones, and sniper fire.
Oh, you missed Hamas. You forgot one.
Isn't that interesting? It's kind of like playing into the exact thing that Christopher was talking about, that she somehow misses that they're being victimized by Hamas, right? Isn't that fascinating?
Well, look, I would put Hamas at the top of the hierarchy because, look, if you don't have Hamas, they wouldn't be victimized by any of those other people.
Yeah,
They're
also,
they are true victims in the sense that they are collateral damage in a war that's being prosecuted against Hamas. But if Hamas didn't start a war, would they be collateral damage, Sitch? I don't think they
No.
would be.
No, they wouldn't be. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly it. Sure.
So who's the victimizer here?
Well, and also there's just this very interesting thing that they've switched from saying, Israel's going too far, Israel's causing too much collateral damage, which I think are all arguments people can levy, but they've switched that to, well,
It's a genocide.
Yeah, into you're just in favor of Zionism. You like literally being in favor of Israel's right to exist as a country. That's the moral failing. And that's a pretty big leap from what the argument used to be, at the beginning of this conflict to what it is now, right? Which honestly, and it makes me think, is it really that big of a leap to go from anti-Zionism to anti-Semitism, considering the giant leap we just took from ceasefire to anti-Zionism?
It's not. And look, I'm sure there are people embedded in that crowd that are just anti-Semites. I'm sure they are. This gives them plenty of cover. So to say that, there's no anti-Semitism going on and we're all completely innocent, I don't know. Show me the numbers on that one.
Right.
That's a tall order.
And I don't remember if she said in this video, but it goes into this whole fantastical virtue signal like, listen, all the Israelis and Palestinians should live in one magical state that's a multicultural liberal democracy. It's like, okay, that's a great idea. No one wants that lives there, right? It's so interesting to me that these people will criticize, rightfully so, George W. Bush back in the day for thinking he could just force democracy on Iraq, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And now that's literally what they want to do, with Israel and Palestine. They just want to force their version of democracy between these two groups of people that don't want to live together.
Yeah, I mean, the one state solution is Israel, right? I mean, Israel is there are Palestinian Israelis. There are people who are of Arab descent that are
Right.
living, who are Israeli citizens, right?
Yeah, but
Is
they
that
don't
the
want
case with Palestine or
No,
Gaza
no,
or
no.
right?
But they don't want it to. They would not want it to just be the current state of Israel, having the same rules and legal system set forward. That needs to be dismantled essentially.
Brianna
according to
Joy
these people.
Gray, Brianna Joy Gray wouldn't want that.
No. Yeah,
Oh,
they wouldn't want
too bad. I mean, too bad, right?
Right.
Are we allowed to call a child a victim when he's been orphaned by the Israeli state? Isn't it oppression to be forced to live in an occupied 25-mile territory for 75 years? What does Rufo have to say when the oppressor isn't an abstract category, but an American-backed army that's pledged to turn Gaza into a parking lot, seemingly no matter how many dead children it takes? If it's woke.
The problem is, which Brown will never acknowledge, and none of these people would ever acknowledge, is that if the racial groups were swapped, if the perception was that Palestinians were white and the Israelis were not white, I don't think 90% of these people would care about the situation at all.
Oh, of course not. Yeah.
I don't think they'd care.
Yeah. It's so bizarre, but it's true.
And I don't think it's necessarily because they're like, oh, we don't like white people, racist. It's just because built into this sort of weird leftist ideology is this, we need to look for examples of like the quote white European colonizer subjugating the non-white person. And so they're like looking for that example to play out to justify all of their political theories.
Right.
And so Israel to them is like the perfect example of it. even though it's obviously not the perfect example, because you have a situation where, Israel is, has been attacked essentially by surrounding countries and the Palestinians for like 70 plus years. So it's a very muddled, confusing, horrible situation to try to disentangle.
Yeah, if a largely black nation was prosecuting a war against white terrorists,
Right. And yeah, exactly. If
they'd be
there
making
was
movies about it.
like, yeah, if there was some country, okay, that had the same problem and had a white population was committing terrorist acts against the majority black population, black government, and the white population, same thing. Not everyone's part of the terrorist organization, but they're controlled by this sort of Hamas-like society, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think, first of all, not only do I think Brianna's position on it would be 100% flip-flopped, I think a lot of people's situation, I think even a lot of people, even the pro, Israel people, I think a lot of people's positions on this would all be flip-flopped completely because of the racist change, sadly.
Yeah, it is sad. It is sad, but that's the case. Yeah.
To point out an obvious power dynamic, how can you ever fight for equality? And here we get to Rufo's goal and the trap Zadie Smith has fallen into. At the start of her piece, Smith says she, quote, understands the ethics underpinning the protest to be based on two widely recognized principles. One, that there is an ethical duty to express solidarity with the weak in any situation that involves oppressive power. And two, if the machinery of oppressive power is to be trained on the weak, then there is a duty to stop the gears by any means necessary. But what both Smith and Rufo-style conservatives miss is that there is no conspiracy to place people in certain artificial categories here. The goal is not to protect the weak. What does that even mean? The goal is to stop a genocide. What people are responding to, what protesters are motivated by, is real.
It's so weird. She repeats it and then she just literally doesn't get it. What does it mean to be protecting the weak? People are actually dying. It's not
Yeah.
hypothetical. It's like, well, what do you mean? That's just because you're perceiving it exactly through that lens. Is that, and I've literally heard Brana say it. I've heard them all say it, that it's like Israel is the side with all the military might, all the military power. The Palestinians don't have any of the power. Therefore, they're not responsible for their actions. Hamas is not responsible for its actions. They're simply the victims of the environment created for them by Israel. We've all heard this a million times. We've all heard this whenever someone shows up on Piers Morgan and they ask them to denounce Hamas and they don't, and they say, well, it's actually Israel created the problem in the first place, right? Because they don't have the Palestinian people and Hamas, they don't have the agency to sort of craft their own future, their own behavior.
Yeah. It's just, but these people are legitimately oppressed. Response,
It's like,
right?
oh, okay,
It's fine.
that has nothing to do. That doesn't disprove anything that Christopher Rufo or anyone else has said.
It doesn't. Not at
Yeah.
all. Not at all.
What we call material. Whether you call them oppressed or weak, the fact is that 34,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israel over the last 7 months in Gaza. 3/4 of those killed have been women and children. The UN Food Program chief says there is full-blown famine in northern Gaza making its way south. There are 17,000 orphans in Gaza. More than 70% of all housing in Gaza has been destroyed. A new UN report estimates it would take 80 years to rebuild them all. And of course, you cannot bring back the dead. A majority of Americans want a ceasefire, and college kids, including young Jews, more of whom are more sympathetic to Palestine than Israel. An October YouGov poll found that more people aged 18 to 29 sympathize with Palestinians than Israelis in the current conflict. They are protesting not because of some academic notion of who is oppressed or weak, but because human beings are being killed. Oppression is an action that's being carried out by an Israeli apartheid state, the leader of whom just yesterday rejected a ceasefire and hostage deal because it would force him to stop his siege on Gaza, something he pledges will not end until Hamas is eliminated, an outcome his own military intelligence says is an impossibility. To tens of thousands of college students and millions of people across the world, compassion for Palestinians comes not from their academic status as victims, but from the fact that they are being victimized and with American tax dollars and bombs.
This is such a weird way that she's like trying to understand this argument. And I don't know if it's intentional or just ignorant because no one is ever like the argument is not, oh, all these protesters and all these people are kind of like walking around and they have this hyper intellectualized academic like theory in their mind and they're like, I need to calculate who is a victim in this situation. Beep, boop, beep. Let me see, put Palestinian child here, give 10, 20 victimization points, ID of soldier minus 30. Like, no one's doing that. That's not how any of this works, okay, whatsoever. It's all based on emotion and intuition. And they
Right.
create, like, these philosophies, they create an underlying assumption base that all of your other beliefs spring forward from, okay, in a very intuitive fashion. And if the underlying emotional base, the philosophical argument that is kind of shoved into people's brains is, you know, the world is made up of oppressors and oppressed people. And the oppressors are 9 times out of 10 white people. And 9 times out of 10, they're white European people because the entire world is white Europeans trying to go around the world to colonize and subjugate non-white people for their own purposes, right? If
Right.
that's the foundational belief that is being shoved into you, then your intuitions very obviously arise the way they do about the Israel-Palestine situation to have a very like simplistic, dumb position where you just say, oh, well, Israel just is the evil colonizer. And that's what Christopher Rufo is talking about. That's what we're talking about.
Right. The stereotype creates a an idea that not only are they victimizing people, but they're responsible for all of the bad things in the world,
Yes.
And so this is why it's easier for them to put the responsibility on Israel, which I think is just completely misplaced. Like how does Hamas escape all responsibility here? Like even like, it ranges from the people who think Hamas is bad, but they still don't hold them responsible for the killing. It's still Israel's fault. To the people who think Hamas is good for doing this, like, then it's not their fault because they're lashing out against their oppressors. It's just so insane. We have to have some measure of behavior from everyone, regardless of this ideology of oppressor oppressed, right?
Yeah. I'm so glad you said it because, Brianna Greyjoy on, record saying that she thought that Raina lady that was on Pierce Morgan, she said she's like one of the best, most cogent, smartest people to talk about the Israel-Palestine issue.
Right.
And that woman goes on Pierce Morgan and says, that she won't denounce Hamas. She said on Twitter the other day that she continues saying that she won't denounce Hamas whatsoever. And that it's just people, Hamas is just like the righteous Palestinian resistance against Israel. And that's who Brianna Greyjoy is pointing to and is saying like, oh, this is a very intelligent person, the best person on this topic. And yet in this video, she's like, that's not how anyone sees the world. It's just real oppression. What do you mean? What do you mean, Christopher Rufo?
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy that they don't see it when it's so obvious. But look, if they say, when we do it, it's righteousness. And when they do the same thing, it's war crimes.
Of course.
Yeah.
Framing the issue as a kind of oppression identity Olympics enables those who support Israel to pretend that those who do not share their sympathies are acting irrationally, following some unfair and reductive categorization of Jews as oppressors. Alternatively,
True.
that those sympathetic with Palestine are simply anti-Semitic. If the reasoning of Palestine supporters is seen as irrational, reductive, or bigoted, well, they can be ignored.
Well, this is another super ironic part of the debate. It's like, okay, so they're using this tactic that is commonly used on the woke left of crying racism, sexism,
Right.
transphobia, homophobia, to basically take any critique of, women in sports, parental notification, like anything that is a serious topic, just to say, no, you're a racist for even talking about this.
Right.
So them doing this same move, which I don't condone the move when the woke people do it.
Right.
So I'm not going to condone it when it's going on here either. But to basically use this maneuver over and over and over again, and then say, "Oh yeah, you can't do that. That's
Yes.
bad." when it's
Yes,
your signature move, I mean,
exactly.
where's the irony meter here?
That's broken. That's really what's like really pushing people is that they all sense the irony. They've been saying everyone's racist for every little thing for 8 years, and now they're like, "How dare you call us anti-Semitic?" Okay, you're ruining
Right.
the nuance of the situation. Meanwhile, Brianna herself and all these other people are doing, while they're saying this, they're doing the same thing. Because they're saying,
Okay.
we're
Yeah.
going to label you a Zionist, and that means you support genocide. We've heard
Yeah.
this from all these people. If you support Israel in any fashion, that means you're in favor of genocide. You're in favor of killing children, you monster.
You're right.
It's insane.
They do the same exact move that they're bitching about.
Yes, it's total hypocrisy.
All in the same debate too.
I
Oh,
know.
crazy.
And this is why you get so many people proposing various explanations of why so many people care about Palestine that avoid the most obvious answer. It's because they're human beings, and it breaks our hearts to see them slaughtered, tortured, and starved.
Yeah, but you have a woman on your show that won't denounce any of the stuff that Hamas did on October 7th,
Right.
which is equally horrifying.
Yes.
Yeah. The people that you're crying about are collateral damage. It's unintentional killing. The people who were killed on October 7th were 100% intentional.
Yes.
That's a giant difference.
Of
It's a
course.
huge difference. Yeah.
Could you imagine if there's some video of Christopher Rufo saying like, "Oh man, the smartest person to talk about like race issues in America is Nick Fuentes," or something like
Oh,
that, right?
yes. Yeah.
Like Brianna and all these other people would be making a million videos like, "Oh my God, this is proof we knew it. Christopher Rufo's a racist." Blah 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 blah, right? And
Right.
Brianna essentially did that, and no one cares. It's totally fine.
Yeah, they're emboldening these psychopaths. They are.
Yep.
It's horrifying.
But Zadie Smith seems to struggle with this. She asked the audience to consider whether it's fair for a pro-Palestine student to call a Jewish student a Zionist without once considering whether the Jewish student is in fact a Zionist, or whether the student describing her as such is themselves Jewish, as so many pro-Palestine protesters are. Is the student called Zionist uncomfortable because they've been mislabeled? If so, that's fair. Or alternatively, have they been accurately identified as supporters of a Jewish ethno-state? Have they been unfairly judged, or are they just uncomfortable with the reality that the Overton window is shifting and more people are rejecting the Zionist project, which required and continues to require the violent ethnic cleansing of the Arab demographic majority from the region? If being called Zionist creates...
Listen, that's the only reason all that. First of all, calling Israel an ethno-state is kind of weird, and it's kind of hilariously wrong anyway, because you can be a citizen of Israel, as there are many citizens of Israel who are not Jewish. Number one, and first of all, it's not even an ethno-state because it's obviously different ethnicities of even Jewish people from all over the world.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
So it's like that doesn't even make sense. But then number two, even if you want to call it like a religious, like first of all, it's not a theocracy; it's a liberal democracy where people vote. But there's a bunch of non-Jewish, there's millions of non-Jewish citizens.
Yeah.
So just because they say like, well, if you're Jewish, you can be a citizen in Israel, that automatically means that it's an ethno-state, even though you can be a citizen of Israel if you're not Jewish. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I like what Sam Harris said on this when he was talking about, I mean, people will call it an ethno state, and there is some wiggle room there in the definition, obviously. And Sam Harris was saying, I don't endorse ethno states, obviously, but when we live in a world where there's really only one nation, that Jewish people are the majority,
Right.
he's basically saying, like, talk to me in 50 years when there's like 15 Jewish majority nations.
Sure.
Like it's that makes a difference to me. It really does. That it's really just the only place where Jewish people can feel that they're never going to be persecuted by the government or the population.
Well,
I think that's important.
No, it's a good point because, especially for people on the left who have been all about oh my God, minorities have this fear of being persecuted,
Yeah,
right?
they should understand it more than anyone, right?
Yes, and they would if it wasn't that they perceive Jewish people as white.
Right.
Then they
Yeah.
would completely understand it. And the idea that like, oh, all the conflict that's going on in the region is just because they have to maintain the Jewish ethno-state, it's a total lie. It's because they keep getting attacked by terrorist organizations and by like all this stuff, all this conflict going around with them.
Well, and the purging of Jewish people from all Arab-controlled states.
Sure, yeah,
Yeah, it's just
obviously
there's a
from like in the
long
past.
history of
Yeah,
that.
right,
So,
right,
I mean, I don't. There, she's constantly saying, "Look, you guys are overlooking this horrible, all the death toll in Gaza and whatnot." But they completely overlook all the chasing Jewish people out of all of these Arab states when they start talking about, "Oh, this area is all Arab. The Jews are
right,
trying to take over." It's like the reason why they're getting concentrated there is because they're being run out of all these Arab countries.
right.
Yeah.
It's cognitive dissonance in the young Zionist student. Well, congratulations. It just might be that she has a conscience, telling her to examine whether the narrative she was sold as a youngster about her entitlement to a land on the other side of the world from her own campus is justified on the basis of her religion, when her classmates' relatives have been killed in the dozens so that she might have a right of return to a land she may never have even visited.
This is the problem. They have this like really wacky idea in their mind that the majority of Israeli citizens are all just white Jews from other countries who just decided to just move to Israel. That's not remotely the case. The majority of people that are in Israel were born in Israel, that are Israeli
Right.
citizens. So it's just this completely ludicrous idea.
Because it's been around for so long,
Yeah, because it's been
obviously.
around for
Yeah.
75 plus years.
Yeah. That's the thing. It's like the Palestinian people have been being subjugated for 75 years. It's like
Hmm.
if you've gone 75 years and not figured out how to live peacefully with your neighbors, like, okay.
Right.
The student experiencing this cognitive dissonance isn't feeling unsafe, they're feeling guilty. And the solution could be to abandon her commitment to Zionism. The alternative is to abandon her conscience. Smith frames the debate as
This is so bad.
Is it? Yeah, yeah. If you don't, if you don't abandon Zionism, you're not you're the evil person, right?
Well, just if you don't agree with me, you have no conscience and you feel guilty about your position. It's like, wow, a lot of mind
Right.
reading going on here.
I know, it's really gross.
I do think if you're on campus and there's a mob of people who've targeted you with a slur that they've created, whatever the slur might be,
Hmm.
you probably feel unsafe, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I looked it up. So these are the demographics in Israel, okay? 73% of Israeli citizens are Jewish.
Right.
21% are classified not Jewish, as either Arab, Palestinian, Druze, or Christian. And then there's 5.7% that are some other classification. Okay. So not an ethno state, you have 26% of the population not Jewish, right?
Right.
Despite the fact that obviously the Jews themselves are not all white anyway, so it's a ridiculous thing. And then on top of that, it says that 80% of the Jewish population, surprise, surprise, were born in Israel.
Oh,
Okay.
they're native born.
Yeah, they're native born, shockingly, right? So she just has this
Right.
like wacky idea, like, oh, it's all these Jews coming from all across the world just coming in, moving in to kick the Palestinians off, kick the Palestinians out.
Look, if you're a second generation, you're still an immigrant, Sitch. Get off the land.
Yeah, bring that argument in America, and oh
I
my God.
know. That's what it's
Oh
so
no.
crazy.
Right, right.
80%. Wow. We got to hang on to that one.
Yep.
genocidal on both sides. She writes, Hamas will not be eliminated, but also the more than 7 million Jewish human beings who live in the gap between the river and the sea will not simply vanish because you think that they should. Well, of course, Jews being disappeared from Israel is not the goal. The end to apartheid is the goal. An equal state where one religion is not established over the others is the goal. Palestinians being granted the right to return to their homeland after subsisting for 75 years as refugees is the goal. a goal that is only being thwarted by Israel's commitment to being a specifically Jewish ethno-state and maintaining the demographic balance necessary to ensure religious dominance. As such, the desires of Zionist students and anti-Zionist students do not carry equal moral weight. You can't both sides a fight for equality where one side wants to deny it to the other, even if they say they're doing it, because God instructs it to be so.
So that's not the argument that Zadie Smith was making, which, again, I don't know if Brianna just doesn't understand it or she's just missing it intentionally. The argument was, in the microcosm of the university, the pro-Israel student is seemingly in the vocal minority, while the pro-Palestinian encampment person is seemingly in the vocal majority, or at least they have the power in these protest movements, until maybe recently. And so therefore, why are they not kind of applying these same sort of dynamics to, these power dynamics that they're applying to everywhere else in the world? Why are they not applying them to this microcosm of college campuses? That's the argument.
That's interesting. That is super interesting.
And that seemed to be completely lost on Brianna here, but because she's basically saying, well, that none of that matters. All that matters is the kids protesting for Palestine are on the right side of history, and the kids protesting in favor of Israel are on the wrong side of history. So therefore, shut up.
Right. Fascinating.
The conversation is painful for the anti-war protesters, in part because the concern for Jewish safety in the abstract is repeatedly weighted against the real, material, visceral threats to Palestinian life.
Yeah, it's elsewhere, though. I don't understand. Do you know how space works? Like, because somebody else's life is threatened in Gaza, that means you don't have a right to feel secure in your college campus in America?
Yes.
That's so ridiculous.
Yes, that's the argument.
That's so ridiculous. That can't be the argument. It's too stupid, Sitch.
34,000 and counting. And time again, Jewish people who simply feel unsafe become the locus of concern. As Zadie Smith put it, in the case of Israel-Palestine, language and rhetoric are and always have been weapons of mass destruction. But language and rhetoric didn't kill Hind Rajab and her family. It didn't murder the Jose Andres aid workers. It didn't flatten every university in Gaza or dig up 16 grave sites there. Belief that Palestinians should be cleared from the land and stripped of any incentive.
What is happening? She's taking two different contexts here.
Yeah.
Two completely different contexts, and she's like mashing them together.
Yes.
Like the protest going on at the college campus where there's this group of people that all abide by certain social standards. And then she's saying, and then there's this other thing going on way over here across the world. And because something's happening there, it's affecting the social standards over here.
Right. Yeah. She's saying because their cause is for the cause for this thing across the world, then I guess it justifies them doing whatever.
It's so bonkers.
Yeah.
This makes absolutely no sense.
To return did that. How else do you explain digging up a graveyard other than to permanently cut ties between a people and their past? I wanted to get, and have been wanting for a while, to get to the core of this issue. People repeatedly ask, well, how do you want to resolve this? It's the question that's frequently put to pro-peace protesters. And over again, we're told this situation is so complex. It's so complex. That's why it's been going on for so long. This is a millennia-long struggle. It's so complex. I think it's not complex. And people try to inject complexity, whether it's the Post saying it's because the kids aren't having enough sex, whether it's people saying, like Rufo saying, well, you only think that Palestinians need to be protected because you see everything as oppressor and oppressee, and because Jews are white and Arabs aren't, that's why you're siding with Palestinians. It's not because of anything real that's happening in the world. But there's something very real happening in the world, and real people are dying in the world. And the question of what can be done all comes down to, in my view, whether or not the rights that Palestinians deserve can be restored. And fundamentally, they cannot be if you are committed to the idea that demographically in that region in the world, there has to be a Jewish majority. That is how you get Palestinians never being allowed to have a right to return.
Here's a question I would like to ask Brianna and anyone on this kind of debate is like, let's say hypothetically, okay, that after October 7th, the Israeli government said, okay, you know what? We hear you. We hear that you're angry with us, okay? We're going to trade the hostages. And in response, we're going to lift all the siege and all the embargo on Gaza. And, we're going to recognize Gaza and the West Bank as separate Palestinian states. And you guys can do whatever you want, right? Do whatever you want. Okay. So they
Okay.
do that. And then a year later, Hamas attacks Israel again.
A year. I mean, it's going to be like a month.
Well, I'm just saying, just give it a year. Say a year later, Hamas attacks Israel again. Okay.
Okay.
What happens then? What is Israel supposed to do at that point? What do all these people say in that situation? Is there
I
an
mean,
answer to that
there'd be
question?
cognitive dissonance. They would just,
Is it still Israel's fault because, well, they subjugated for years? Well, they still have the land. Well, they don't allow the
no,
right of return for people that were kicked out 75 years ago. This is always going to be something,
look, you
right? Because,
guessed it. That's what it's going to
yes,
be. It's like they
right,
started the race behind and will never be able to catch up. And that is always Israel's fault.
right,
Yes.
right. Because
Yeah.
that's the problem, and this is why it's so, these people are so brain rot, okay, that have this, like, it's not complicated. No, it is complicated. Because whether you want to admit it or not, and you're just lying to yourself and lying to your entire audience, if you pretend otherwise, there is a completely legitimate security concern that Israel has against, Hamas and other violent Palestinian organizations. It's a completely legitimate security concern. And the idea that if they just capitulated, that all those security concerns would just dissipate shows you literally understand nothing about human nature, why Hamas exists as an organization, what their goals are. You think Hamas wants to be the government of a democratic country where they could get voted out of office and lose all their power and lose all the money and financial support they get from all over the world? You think they want that?
No, it's easier for Hamas to reign through violence, not
Of
through
course.
the ballot box,
Of
obviously.
course.
Yeah.
This is like, this is so simplistically, naively stupid. This
It
position. Oh, it's
is.
not
Yeah.
complicated. It's not complicated. Just snap your hands and just give them rights and everything's just going to be no problem.
What creates these college graduates that have so little understanding of the world? How's that work, Sitch?
That's a good question.
Because that would threaten that Jewish majority. And I understand that there are people who feel very deeply about this issue and are never going to agree with the idea that there should not be a Jewish state. But I would put forward that a state that's safe for Jewish people, much like I would argue the United States of America, with the second largest Jewish population in the world, is more important than creating a dynamic where Jews are increasingly targeted because of the state of Israel's choice to deny basic rights or freedom to the Palestinian people.
Is like Saudi Arabia an ethno state? It seems like it is.
I don't know if I know that. I don't know if Saudi Arabia. I know some.
Like Iran, is Iran an ethno state?
Well, like they're religious theocracies that say that they like there's a theocratic, majority that says it has power over the others.
Yeah, it just seems like there's a lot of these nations in the area that seem like there's a majority demographic and nobody's bitching about how Iran is not more multicultural.
Sure. No, there
Yeah.
are, and I'm pretty sure there are certain, I don't know what the situation is in Saudi Arabia, but I know there are certain Middle Eastern countries where they do have rules about, immigrating. I believe, was it Qatar or was it the UAE that had the whole conflict where, they were basically shipping in migrant workers who were treated very poorly and were not given, equal rights as the citizens there. These
United
situations
Arab
happen all the
Emirates.
time,
Yeah.
and there's just not a lot of talk about it because no one cares. Because again, you can't put in, as Christopher Rufo said correctly, you can't put in the white oppressor dynamic in the situation.
Right. So it's just invisible to people.
Exactly.
They're like, yeah.
I mean, we're very far apart on this. I agree that I think it would be best for the U.S. to disentangle itself from this conflict entirely, because unlike you, I do think it's incredibly complicated, and I don't think we're improving the situation. I don't think we have any ability to improve the situation. We can invite attacks on ourselves, on our own forces, on our bases by being more involved, and we should, to whatever extent possible, disentangle ourselves from Europe, from the Middle East, etc. But you say it's not complicated, but it is complicated now because the region in question, Gaza, is governed by a terrorist group that attacked Israel and that has pledged to do so again and again and again. So their fear is that until that group is totally and utterly defeated or surrenders, there can be no peace with the people of the region. And the people of the region are, in fact, victims and more victims, and it's awful what's happening to them. But simply allowing Hamas to keep going is not something the Jewish leadership is willing to do. So it has come to this.
Well, Hamas wouldn't exist if there weren't a Jewish state.
A lot of things could be done differently, but here we are now.
Well, here we are now. But the long ago of things that have been done differently doesn't feel very long ago. When you're someone who has the keys to a house that your family lived in for generations, that is now occupied by someone who is an immigrant from Europe or from America, who has a right because of what their religion is and what their ethnicity is.
Wait. She just said it's not long ago. That's 75 years ago. What is she that's a long time ago. Yes.
It's a lifetime.
Yes. If you have your keys from a piece of property from 70 plus years ago saying, listen, when in 1948, okay, my great grandparents, got kicked out of this area and I still have the key to their house. I should be able to move there to this piece of property that's traded hands who knows how many times, since then. Like, that's a ridiculous argument. Yes, that is what makes it complicated. Yes.
Yeah, a lot of hardships take place in people's lives throughout the centuries. The whole idea that you're going to hang on to those hardships and carry a grudge and pass that grudge down to your kids and your grandkids forever and ever and ever is just not a healthy outlook on life. Sooner or later, it's time to move on. And just like enabling this, like saying, oh yeah, the thing that you're doing, losing sleep over this house that your grandfather owned 75 years ago that you've never even seen before. Oh my God, the mental health, like the mental health trauma that you're dumping on people is just, it's not good for anyone. No. You're doing tangible evil in the world at that point.
You're completely correct.
To move to a country that you are fundamentally denied from moving to. This is not a state that was created. But wait a minute. This is not a state that was created that said, all right, Jews are welcome. Everybody can move here. This is great. This was a state that was created that said, Jews can move here. These other people have to be ethnically cleansed from the land and you were never allowed to return. And that is the fundamental sin. That is the original sin. And if you...
Okay. They said, the UN said, how about we have this problem here in this region. There's lots of conflict. There's lots of violence, right? Like, she's acting like, oh, everything was just huggy bunches of the Jewish population and non-Jewish, population all hugging each other. And then they said, we want our own state. And that created violence. It's like, no, there was all this violence that was going on between these two groups of people because they didn't want to live together and they all wanted to have their own, things. And so the UN comes in and they say, okay, here's our plan. Here's a separation plan so you can both have your own country, you can have your own sandbox. And the Jews said, we'll take it. And the Palestinians said, F off. We're going to join forces with a bunch of these surrounding countries and we're going to start a war against you and invade you and try to kill you and try to drive you from the land and or murder you. And then it didn't work. And that's why a lot of people got displaced because they're like, for good or for ill, the Israeli population was like, I don't know if we want to have a bunch of people living in this area that just tried to kill us or people that we associate with the same group of people that tried to kill us, right? For good or for ill. And she just completely removes that from the entire conversation, makes it seem like, oh, if Israel had just been open arms and welcoming to all these people in 1948, then everything would have been totally fine.
Yeah, it's completely biased perspective on the whole history of the region.
You want this to end, if you want to actually defeat Hamas, it is getting to the core of what Palestinians, including Hamas, have been fighting for, which is to have those rights returned to them. That's it. That's the answer to the question. If you don't like that answer, you can say, we have to have a Jewish state and Palestinians are never going to be allowed to come back here. And you're signing up for infinitely more fighting, or a kind of a final solution where the Palestinians are finally killed and wiped off the earth. And that's what many people think is what's going on in Gaza right now, a ratcheting up of this ethnic cleansing that's been going on for 75 years
fighting
that might become permanent if they're all killed and expelled from the region.
The organization, the quasi-government organization they're fighting against has not surrendered yet. And if they're willing to go forward with this until they are utterly defeated, then that's just what they're willing to do. And it's like our projection onto them that, well, you should stop this. Well, they don't want to.
He is so angry right now.
I know.
Brianna is so angry. She's like, how dare you ask these oppressed people, Robbie, to surrender? They're going to fight till the bitter end, okay? They're never going to surrender.
Yes. Why is that? Why is that not the like, why don't we hear any of them say that? Isn't that so weird? How come there's not a call to just say, like, listen, it is, Hamas should surrender 100%.
Of course. Yeah.
How come that? Even just say, like, the Palestinians should surrender. Okay. Surrender and try to show that they can live in peace and, so that there can be a trustful relationship built between the two countries, right? The two peoples.
Well, this is why this is why people accuse them of anti-Semitism, because like the thing that doesn't seem to be being said here is that Hamas wants all the Jewish people gone from the region. Like that's literally what they're fighting for. So when you say, look, they're never going to surrender, you're basically endorsing that position.
Yes.
How is that not anti-Semitism?
I mean, it definitely
explain it to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why it definitely is like, what the hell?
Look, and if you're Israel, if you know that your enemy wants every single Jewish person removed from the area, why aren't you going to fight that enemy? You're literally fighting for your survival.
Right.
Yeah, look, saying it's very simple and then having these kind of takes, Brianna, you need to rethink that one.
And the leadership of the Gaza Strip wants to keep fighting Israel until it's gone. So here we are. But I agree with you that we should not be involved. And the part of your radar focused on the protests themselves and how they're characterized in words as violence. I did read that essay, and like you, I don't think criticism of Israel should be always read as anti-Semitism. I think often it is clearly not anti-Semitism. I certainly don't think it should be codified into law as a kind of anti-Semitism, something that people, including Christopher Rufo, have pushed back on. Christopher Rufo wrote an op-ed for Bari Weiss's Substack.
Cool. I just want to point out that Robbie agrees with me. Nobody should be using this, we can't talk about this subject because you're a big old bigot if we do.
Right.
Well, yeah.
For the Free Press, co-written with Jenin Younes, who is who is, I think, of Palestinian descent herself and is kind of a left-leaning civil libertarian person. And they had a great co-written piece about how this new Anti-Semitism Awareness Act will absolutely be bad for the cause of free speech on first principles. So I encourage people to check that out. More Rising right after this.
Okay, worst radar ever on Rising. Okay. Garbage tier content. Let Robbie write the radars from now on, okay?
Robbie writes all radars.
You take a break, Brianna. Look, we went to this video, though, obviously, I think the audience leans leftist college students on Rising, and the comments are probably like, slay, queen. Oh, you're killing it. Robbie's such a race. It's kind of
It's interesting because, but I think it really depends. Sometimes the videos are very much super pro Robbie, and then with a lot of the Israel stuff, they be a lot of the very anti-Israel people circling in the comments.
Hi, you just listened to a Sitch and Adam recorded video. That's right, we're still doing recorded videos. And of course, we're still doing our live streams. Our Sunday live stream begins at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And our daily live streams start at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. Come check it out. You're gonna love it. Subscribe to this channel right here to watch the live show or watch more of our awesome deep dive videos.